Picture this. It's 1963, and you're standing trackside at Riverside International Raceway. The air vibrates with the thunder of big block monsters, 427 Cobras, fuel-injected Corvettes, heavyweight Pontiacs pushing 400-plus horsepower. Then a nimble Falcon Sprint tears past them all through the S's, its engine screaming a different song entirely, higher-pitched, angrier, more precise. The crowd can't believe what they're seeing. That little Ford just walked away from cars with nearly twice the displacement. Welcome to the revolution nobody saw coming. In Manhattan, the engine making this magic happen displaced just 289 cubic inches. In an era obsessed with the mantra, "Shows there's no replacement for displacement," Ford engineers had committed heresy. They'd taken their small block V8 and turned it into something that would embarrass the big boys on road courses across America. They called it the K Code, and it was about to rewrite everything racers thought they knew about making power. Here's what made everyone lose their minds. This engine officially produced just 271 horsepower. On paper, that number looked almost laughable next to the 425 horsepower Super Duty Pontiacs or the 360-horse fuel-injected Corvettes dominating showrooms. But Ford's engineers knew something the competition didn't. In racing, especially road racing, where you had to brake, turn, and accelerate repeatedly, raw horsepower was only part of the equation. The K-Code wasn't built to win bench racing arguments. It was built to win actual races. Nuntmanensent, let me set the stage for you. By 1963, Ford was hungry, desperately hungry. General Motors owned the performance image with Corvette. Chrysler was building wild max wedge motors that dominated drag strips. Ford? They had the Thunderbird, which had gotten fat and lazy, more boulevard cruiser than performance machine. Henry Ford II, grandson of the founder, was tired of seeing Ford dismissed as the brand your grandfather drove to church. He wanted Ford to mean performance. He wanted to win. The company had already started developing what would become their FE big block family, those 390s and 427s that would eventually power everything from Galaxies to Cobras. But there was a problem. Big engines meant big weight. Big weight meant poor handling. Poor handling meant getting embarrassed on any track with actual corners. Ford needed something different, something revolutionary. Enter the small block 289, born from the original 221 cubic inch V8 that Ford introduced in 1962. The 289 came about simply by boring and stroking the little engine to its practical limits. The bore went from 3.5 to 4 inches. The stroke stretched from 2.87 to 2.87 inches. Wait, that's the same stroke. That's because Ford kept the short stroke intentionally. This was crucial to what came next. Yes, the standard 289 was already a sweet engine. In two-barrel form, it made about 200 horsepower. With a four-barrel carb, you got 225. Respectable numbers for a small engine. But Ford's performance division, working in secret at first, had bigger plans, much bigger plans. The K-Code project started with a simple question. How much power could they extract from 289 cubic inches using production-based parts that could survive both racing and street driving? The answer would shock everyone, including Ford's own executives. Then on the foundation was the basic 289 block. But that's where the similarities to your grocery-getter Fairlane ended. Ford engineers started with the heads. The K-Code received special high-flow cylinder heads with larger valves, 1.78-inch intakes, and 1.45-inch exhausts compared to the standard 1.67 and 1.45. These weren't just bigger, they were relocated for better flow. The combustion chambers were carefully machined to achieve a compression ratio of 10.5.1, right at the limit of what pump gas could handle. But here's where it got really interesting. While everyone else was using hydraulic lifters for quiet, maintenance-free operation, Ford went old school with solid lifters. Solid lifters meant more maintenance, more noise, and definitely more complaints from dealers. They also meant the engine could rev higher and make more power. The K-Code solid lifter cam was specifically ground with duration and lift that would make power from 2,500 all the way to 6,500 RPM. In 1963, a production engine that could safely spin to 6,500 RPM was almost unheard of. And the intake manifold was a work of art. Cast iron, yes, but with carefully sized runners that maintained velocity while flowing enough air to feed the engine at high RPM. On top sat an Autolite 4100 4-barrel carburetor specifically calibrated for the K-Code's requirements. This wasn't some massive 780 CFM monster like you'd find on a big block. The Autolite flowed about 470 CFM, perfectly sized for the 289's actual airflow needs. And the bottom end got serious attention too. While the crankshaft was the standard forged steel unit, the connecting rods were specifically selected for strength. The pistons were forged aluminum units designed to handle the compression and RPM. The harmonic balancer was unique to the K-Code, larger and heavier to control the vibrations at high engine speeds. And even the exhaust system was special. K-Code engines got unique exhaust manifolds with better flow characteristics. When installed in performance packages, they were typically paired with dual exhausts and low-restriction mufflers. The entire system was designed to evacuate exhaust gases as efficiently as possible, reducing pumping losses and freeing up power. Now, here's the number that made everyone scratch their heads: 271 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. Maximum torque was 312 pound-feet at 3,400 RPM. Compare that to Chevrolet's 327 with fuel injection making 360 horsepower, or Pontiac's 389 tri-power pushing out 348 horses. On paper, the K-Code looked overmatched, but those numbers didn't tell the whole story, not even close. The K-Code had a secret weapon, its power curve. While big blocks made huge peak numbers but fell off quickly above their power peak, the K-Code pulled hard from 2,500 RPM all the way to its 6,500 RPM redline. It was like having two engines in one, tractable enough for street driving, but absolutely vicious when you kept your foot in it. This broad power band meant drivers could hold gears longer through corners, maintaining momentum where big block cars had to shift and lose time. An end-weight distribution was another advantage. The 289 K-Code weighed about 460 pounds fully dressed. A 427 FE big block? Try 650 pounds or more, that's nearly 200 pounds of extra weight, and it all sat right over the front wheels. In a Falcon Sprint, the K-Code's lighter weight meant better turn-in, less understeer, and better braking. The car could dance where big block cars lumbered, and Enford's first major deployment of the K-Code came in the 1963 Fairlane. This mid-size sedan seemed an unlikely performance hero, but with the K-Code under the hood and some suspension tweaks, it became a giant killer in SCCA B production racing. The Fairlane's relatively light weight, about 3,200 pounds, combined with the K-Code's power delivery, made for a potent combination. And the 1963 Monte Carlo Rally proved the point. A K-Code powered Falcon, driven by Swedish rally ace Bo Ljungfelt, finished third overall against dedicated rally cars from all over Europe. This wasn't some regional club race. This was one of the most prestigious motorsport events in the world, and a little Ford with a 289 had just embarrassed the establishment. But the real fireworks started in 1964, when Ford introduced the Mustang. The K-Code was offered from day one, creating what many consider the first true Mustang performance car. In the lightweight Mustang body, about 2,800 pounds for a notchback, the K-Code transformed the pretty pony car into a serious performance machine. Here's where things get really interesting. Carroll Shelby, the Texas chicken farmer turned racing legend, was tasked by Ford to create a Mustang that could compete in SCCA B production racing. He started with K-code-equipped Mustangs and worked his magic. The result was the GT350, and while Shelby made numerous modifications, the heart remained that high-revving 289 and Shelby's modifications to the K-code were enlightening. He knew the factory rating of 271 horsepower was conservative. With headers, a different camshaft, and an aluminum intake manifold topped with a 715 CFM Holley carburetor, Shelby GT350s were making 306 horsepower at the wheels. That translates to about 350-360 at the crankshaft when you factor in drivetrain losses, from 289 cubic inches. In 1965, but even in stock form, the K-code was underrated. Dynamometer testing by independent magazines repeatedly showed stock K-code engines making 245-250 horsepower at the wheels. Using the typical 15% drivetrain loss calculation, that means the engine was actually producing closer to 290-295 horsepower at the flywheel. Ford was sandbagging by at least 20 horsepower. Why would Ford underrate their own engine? Racing classifications. SCCA and other sanctioning bodies used power-to-weight ratios to classify cars. By publishing a lower number, Ford could get the K-code cars into more favorable classes where they could dominate. It was brilliant gamesmanship. The K-code's competition success was immediate and overwhelming. In 1964, K-code Mustangs won the SCCA B Production Championship. In 1965, they did it again. And in 1966, 3 consecutive championships against Corvettes, Cobras, and whatever else anyone could throw at them. The little 289 that could have become the giant killer Ford desperately needed. Track performance told the story. A properly set-up K-code Mustang could run 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds and complete the quarter mile in the mid-14-second range at about 95 mph. Those numbers might not sound impressive today, but in 1964 they were supercar territory. More importantly, the K-code cars could maintain those performance levels lap after lap without overheating or losing power. The engine's reliability was remarkable. While big blocks were notorious for overheating and eating themselves under sustained high RPM use, K-code engines just kept singing their high-pitched song all day long. The solid lifters needed adjustment every 6,000 miles or so, but beyond that, these engines were bulletproof when properly maintained. Let's talk about that distinctive sound for a moment. The K-code didn't rumble like a big block, it screamed. The solid lifters created a characteristic mechanical clatter at idle that turned into a metallic shriek at high RPM. It was intoxicating. Drivers described it as addictive, always encouraging you to rev just a little higher, push just a little harder. The engine felt alive in a way that lazy big blocks never could. And the transmission choices were crucial to the K-code's success. Ford paired it with either a close ratio 4-speed manual or, surprisingly, a 3-speed automatic. The manual was obviously the choice for performance, with gear ratios perfectly spaced to keep the engine in its power band. But even the automatic versions were quick, thanks to that broad torque curve. Engine rear axle ratios made a huge difference. Street K-code cars typically came with 350.1 or 389.1 gears, but racers immediately swapped in 4.111 or even 456.1 ratios. With the steep gears and the engine's high RPM capability, K-code cars could achieve stunning acceleration while still pulling strongly past 120 mph. The fuel system deserves special attention. That Autolite 4100 carburetor was a masterpiece of calibration. It had to provide precise fuel metering from idle to redline, dealing with the K-code's solid lifter cam that created lower vacuum at idle than a hydraulic cam. The accelerator pump was specifically sized to prevent bog during quick throttle applications. The power valve was calibrated to open at exactly the right manifold vacuum to enrich in the mixture for maximum power. And end cooling was critical. The K-code generated more heat than a standard 289 due to its higher compression and RPM capability. Ford equipped K-code cars with larger radiators, higher flow water pumps, and thermal clutch fans that engaged based on temperature. The engineering team had learned from racing that keeping the engine cool was just as important as making power. And then the oil system got upgraded too. K-code engines used higher pressure valve springs to control the valves at high RPM. This put more stress on the valve train, requiring better lubrication. The oil pump was calibrated for higher pressure, and Ford recommended more frequent oil changes, every 3,000 miles, versus the standard 6,000-mile interval. Here's something that really showcases the K-code's efficiency. Despite making 271 horsepower and being capable of embarrassing big blocks on racetracks, a K-code Mustang could achieve 18 miles per gallon on the highway when driven conservatively. Try getting that from a 427 Cobra. This dual personality, race car when you wanted it, economical cruiser when you didn't, made the K-code uniquely practical. In-end production numbers tell an interesting story. Ford built exactly 7,273 K-code equipped vehicles from 1963 to 1967. That's it. The breakdown is fascinating. About 1,500 in Fairlanes, roughly 4,000 in Mustangs, and the remainder scattered among Falcons, Comets, and even a handful of Galaxies. Each engine was hand-assembled at Ford's Cleveland engine plant with special attention to tolerances and balance. And the assembly process was different from standard 289s. K-code engines were built on a separate line by Ford's most experienced engine builders. Each engine was run on a dynamometer before shipping to ensure it met specifications. Rejected engines were disassembled and rebuilt. Ford couldn't afford to have a K-code fail in competition. The dealers had a love-hate relationship with K-code cars. They loved the prestige and the customers it brought to showrooms. They hated the maintenance. Solid lifters needed periodic adjustment, something most Ford mechanics weren't used to. The high compression ratio meant K-code cars were fussy about fuel quality. Use regular instead of premium, and you'd hear the engine knock like someone hitting the block with a hammer. And Ditchide in Enford provided special training for dealers who wanted to sell and service K-code vehicles. The service manual was twice as thick as the standard 289 manual, with detailed procedures for valve adjustment, carburetor tuning, and ignition timing. Ford even created a special toolkit specifically for K-code maintenance, and in racing development continued throughout the K-code's production run. Ford's engineers, working with racers like Holman Moody and Carroll Shelby, developed an extensive catalog of performance parts. Special camshafts, aluminum intake manifolds, header exhaust systems, different carburetor options, all designed to extract even more from the willing little engine. Nantimentermen with full race preparation, K-code engines were making well over 320 horsepower. Some builders claimed 350 or even 375 horsepower, though these engines were basically hand grenades, rebuilt after every race. The fact that you could extract that kind of power from 289 cubic inches using 1960s technology was simply astounding. And the K-code influenced engine development throughout the industry. Chevrolet rushed to develop their own high-winding small block, resulting in the 302 Z28 engine. Chrysler created the 340 six-pack. Everyone suddenly realized that displacement wasn't everything. The K-code had changed the game. But Ford's own development moved on. In 1968, they introduced the 302 tunnel port and Boss 302 engines, spiritual successors to the K-code that took the high RPM concept even further. The K-code had proven the concept. These new engines refined it. Without the K-code's success, these legendary engines might never have existed. And the cultural impact was significant. The K code helped establish the Mustang as a serious performance car, not just a secretary's car, as some critics initially dismissed it. It proved that American manufacturers could build sophisticated, high-revving engines that could compete with European sports cars on their own terms. The K code was engineering proof that David could indeed beat Goliath. In it, own and maintenance stories from original owners are telling. Those who understood the K code's needs, frequent valve adjustments, premium fuel, regular oil changes, were rewarded with incredible reliability. One documented example shows a K code Fairlane with over 200,000 miles on the original engine, still running strong. But ignore the maintenance, and the K code would punish you. Collapsed lifters, burned valves, and spun bearings awaited the negligent. The street racing scene embraced K code cars immediately. Their ability to rev quickly made them perfect for stoplight Grand Prix. While a big block car was still building boost, the K code was already shifting into second gear. The lightweight front end meant better weight transfer for traction. K code cars became legendary on Woodward Avenue, Van Nuys Boulevard, and every other street racing venue in America. Track day enthusiasts discovered something else. K code cars were educational. The engine's linear power delivery and the car's balanced handling taught drivers about momentum, proper lines, and smooth inputs. You couldn't just mash the throttle and hope for the best, like in a big block car. The K code demanded and rewarded skill, and the collector market has finally recognized the K code's significance. While Shelby GT350s command six figures, regular K code Mustangs and Fairlanes remained relatively affordable until recently. Now documented K code cars with matching numbers engines are bringing serious money. A pristine K code Mustang Fastback recently sold for over $80,000 at auction, and finding original K code parts has become increasingly difficult. Those special cylinder heads, the specific harmonic balancer, the correct exhaust manifolds, they're all becoming unobtainium. Reproduction parts exist, but serious collectors want original pieces. A complete date-coded K code engine recently sold for $15,000. Just the engine.NNN modern technology has validated what 1960s racers knew intuitively. Computer modeling shows the K code's combustion chamber design was nearly optimal for its displacement and RPM range. The valve angles, port shapes, and chamber volume created excellent mixture motion and flame propagation. Ford engineers, working with slide rules and experience, had gotten it right. Dyno testing of surviving original K code engines continues to surprise. With modern fuel and oils, these 50-plus-year-old engines often exceed their original power ratings. One recently tested example made 284 horsepower at 6,200 RPM on pump gas. Completely stock except for electronic ignition, the K code was even better than Ford claimed. The racing legacy lives on. Vintage racing organizations specifically class K code cars together, recognizing their historical significance. Watching a field of K code Mustangs and Falcons dice through corners, engines screaming toward 7,000 RPM, is like stepping back in time. The sound alone is worth the price of admission. Let's put this in perspective. In an era when bigger was always considered better, when cubic inches were king, Ford engineers proved that intelligence could triumph over brute force. They took 289 cubic inches and made it competitive with engines nearly twice its size. They did it with careful engineering, attention to detail, and a willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. The K code represented a philosophical shift in American performance. It wasn't just about straight-line acceleration anymore. It was about complete performance, acceleration, braking, handling, reliability. The K code could do it all. It brought European sports car thinking to American muscle, creating something entirely new in the process. And think about the courage it took. Ford was betting that American buyers, raised on the bigger is better mentality, would appreciate a sophisticated, high-revving small block. They were asking customers to pay extra for an engine that made less peak horsepower than the competition. It was a huge gamble. But it worked because the K-code delivered where it mattered, on the racetrack and on the street. It proved that 271 horsepower properly delivered could embarrass 400 horsepower poorly applied. It showed that engineering excellence could overcome displacement disadvantage. It demonstrated that American engineers could think outside the traditional box. And the K-code's influence extended far beyond Ford. It sparked an industry-wide revolution in small block development. Suddenly, everyone was working on high-revving, high-compression, small blocks. The entire Trans Am racing series was essentially born from the K-code's success. Without the K-code proving the concept, would we have gotten the Boss 302, the Z28, the AAR CUDA? Doubtful. Modern Ford performance engineers still reference the K-code when developing new engines. The philosophy of extracting maximum performance from minimum displacement lives on in EcoBoost technology. That twin-turbo 3.5-liter V6 making 647 horsepower in the Ford GT. That's K-code thinking with modern technology and in us. The human stories behind the K-code are just as compelling as the technical specifications. Engineers who worked on the project describe 18-hour days, sleeping at the dyno facility, living on coffee and sandwiches while chasing another 2 horsepower. They speak of it as the most challenging and rewarding project of their careers. Dissident racing drivers who campaigned K-code cars universally praise them. They describe the engine as a willing partner, always ready to give more if you had the skill to ask for it properly. Unlike big blocks that would overwhelm chassis and tires, the K-code worked with the car as a complete system. It made average drivers good and good drivers great. Wonder the Ford 289 K-code V8 stands as proof that excellence comes not from overwhelming force, but from thoughtful engineering. In a world obsessed with size and power, Ford built something small and smart. They created an engine that could run with anything on a racetrack, deliver reasonable fuel economy on the highway, and last for decades with proper care. And 7,273 engines. That's all Ford built. But those engines changed American performance forever. They proved that sophistication could coexist with muscle. They showed that winning came not from having the most power, but from using power most effectively. They demonstrated that sometimes, just sometimes, David really can beat Goliath. And on the next time you hear that distinctive K-code scream, that mechanical, almost angry sound of solid lifters and high compression working in harmony, remember what you're hearing. You're hearing the engine that changed everything. You're hearing 289 cubic inches of pure engineering excellence. You're hearing the sound of conventional wisdom being shattered at 6,500 RPM. And what's your favorite underdog performance story? Drop a comment below and let me know about the giant killers you've witnessed or owned. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Ford's greatest engines, make sure to subscribe, because we're just getting started exploring the engineering marvels that changed automotive history.